And so at this point, I'd like to bring up Mr. Bill James.
Thank you. This is my Marco Rubio impression. Oh, they had one here. The title of my remarks today is Wonderful Ignorance. Subtitle, The Past is Always Going to Be With Us. I wanted to begin by thanking Vince Gennaro, who was the primary person who arranged my being here. Jeff Shatsky, who was very helpful, and Mark Oppelman. Thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And for the rest of you, if you don't like what I have to say, talk to them about it. I also wanted to thank Brian Kinney, not only for the generosity of his remarks yesterday, but also because he posed a lot of questions that I will hope to discuss later on. I have about like many people, when I talk, I tend to over-prepare, and I have 8 pages of notes I'm supposed to talk about, and at some point I need to stop and let you all ask questions. In fact, Vince, could you wave a hand or pound a gavel or something when I should stop and let people ask questions? Because otherwise I'll just drone on until we're out of time. I also wanted, while I was here, to congratulate Dave Studeman on winning his award yesterday for the outstanding piece of baseball research published in 2012. Dave is my good friend and co-worker. And also, I don't know if you've noticed, but he looks a lot like me. He's about my height, and so the joke I always make is that when I'm tired of making public appearances, I'm just going to tell everybody I've lost 80 pounds and send Dave out to do them for me. I wanted to begin by talking about what SABR was like a long time ago. I joined SABR about 1975 or 1976, attended the first conference, I think in 1976 in Chicago. SABR, at the time that I joined the organization, was a group of about 70 or 80 people, something like that. Not all of them attended the first conference. And within that group of 70 or 80 people, well, first of all, there were a number of people who were minor heroes of mine. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the name Emil Rothi, but Emil used to write wonderful articles for the Baseball Digest, and I read them all the years I was growing up. I think he was actually the editor of the Baseball Digest for a while. I'm not sure he was. He was in SABR, and I got to meet him. He was a very warm, generous man who always had something good to say to you, and he'd take time to talk to you, and that was a great thrill for me. At the first SABR convention that I attended, Fred Lieb talked. Fred Lieb was one of the original members of the Baseball Writers Association of America when it was founded in, I forget whether it was 1906 or 1908, but anyway, Fred was one of the original members. He was one of the most successful sports writers of the 20th century. He wrote a lot of big, thick books about the history of the Philadelphia Athletics and Connie Mack and other things. The organization was so small that you had Dave Malarcher, who was a third baseman in the Negro Leagues, was a member of SABR for several years. The organization was so small that you had the opportunity to get to talk to people like that. And I probably didn't get anything out of meeting Fred Lee, but it was a thrill for me anyway. And I'm very glad that I had the chance to do that. I met Cool Papa Bell, was a friend of Dave Malarcher, and Cool Papa attended a couple of SABR conventions, and I got to meet him. It was a very different type of organization at that time. The organization, SABR now has a heavy contingent of academics. But this reflects a change in the academic world, and a good change in the academic world. Now, you can pretty much say, I'm studying American culture and study whatever it is you want to study. But this was less true in the 1970s. In the 1970s, you taught chemistry or physics or whatever it was you taught. You couldn't write a couple of books about baseball and start teaching classes in baseball and whatever interested you. So the organization was more dominated by what might be called eccentrics than it was by academics. And I have to be careful because I'm sure some of those eccentrics are still alive and kicking. We're probably not the only one. But they were a colorful lot. I remember Stan Grosshandler, who again was a very nice man. He was a doctor from Minnesota who was interested in doctors who played baseball and could tell you everybody who ever played Major League Baseball who went on to become a doctor, and probably anybody who ever needed a doctor. I don't know. I didn't know Bob Davids super well. Bob Davids was the founder of SABR, I guess you all know. There's sometimes an effort now when I attend SABR meetings to portray Bob Davids as the Thomas Jefferson of SABR. I liked Bob. He was a tall, quiet man. He was very bright. He was. I found him to be a little sarcastic. Actually, more than a little sarcastic. This might surprise people but you have to remember that in the 1970s, I was very sarcastic myself. Not that I'm not now, but I'm not nearly as bad as I was. And when you put out a lot of sarcasm, you tend to get quite a bit back. So Bob was somebody you would get quite a bit back from. And also there were some limitations to the breadth of his vision. I'm stealing a story here from somebody who's sitting in the audience in the third row, so it's kind of awkward because I'm telling his story and he's right here. But when about 1977 or 1976, Dick Kramer approached Bob Davids about publishing an article in the SABR Journal about what we would now call sabermetrics. And Bob said, well, we published an article on the statistical analysis last year. I don't know if there's room to do one every year. The entire publishing budget for the world of sabermetrics was one article every 2 or 3 years. It was what we had. It's a very different world. Electrons, the effective use of electrons to disseminate information hadn't been invented yet. And you had to depend on paper and editors. It's extremely different. SABR was an organization of about 70 people, and those of us who were interested in analytical issues were a tiny, isolated minority within that 70. In fact, there were 3 of us. There was Pete Palmer, there was Dick Kramer, and there was myself. I was the youngest of the 3 and the most poorly educated, we would sit around and talk about the issues the kind of issues that we all talk about now, and it was very difficult for me to hold my own. In fact, I would say that in all the years that I have been doing this stuff and meeting people like yourselves, I mean, there are a lot of people who are smarter than I am, but I generally can at least kind of hold my own in the conversation. There are just 2 people that I really feel I have a hard time keeping up with, and that's Dick Kramer and Ben Jedlovic, who is a young man who I think will present tomorrow. We had another advantage then, which was massive ignorance. It was more fun to be a SABR member in some ways, not just because we were young and things are more fun when you're young, and because we're eccentric and things are more fun when you're eccentric, but because it was very easy to find questions that no one had ever researched. Since really basically no serious research of any kind had been done, you could just, and Vince got it exactly right. The key is to find the questions. Once you find a question that is interesting and compelling, it actually makes very little difference to the world as a whole, whether you get the answer right or wrong. It makes a difference to your own career, whether you get it right or wrong. It makes a difference to your pride, whether you get it right or wrong. But if you find an interesting question to research, whether you get the answer right or wrong doesn't matter at all. because if you don't get it right, somebody else will. Every interesting question becomes a basis for sequential research done by a lot of different people. And the first take on the answer to it is always wrong, somewhat, and it's not critical. What's critical is that you find the question. What's critical is to be able to find a question that has an answer to which you do not know the answer. If you can find a question which has an objective answer and you don't know what it is, then you have a research project. I'm not faulting Bob Davis. I say I'm very fond of Bob Davis. He's extremely bright and extremely good man, and we're all grateful to him for starting SABR. He had no concept of what it was we were doing. He didn't have any understanding of what sabermetrics meant, and many of the early members of SABR were not exactly sure that what we were doing was research. They had grave doubts as to whether or not this really constituted research. And in a lot of ways, that mindset sort of lingers. I won an award from SABR a few years ago with Rob Nyer for a book that we had written together. Actually, to be honest, Rob did 90% of the work, but on documenting what pitches pitchers throw. It's a book you can look up and you can pick a pitcher from the 1920s, 1890s. You can look him up and it will tell you what information we could find about what pitches he threw, anything about his pitching motion. It was a very good piece of research. But this won an award from SABR because those guys could relate to this as research. I mean, this is research. You know, you pick a topic like that and do a sort of encyclopedic study of it by combing through thousands of old newspapers. That's research. This other stuff where you pick a question and do a lot of mathematical analysis that only a few people understand, well, I don't know if it's research or not. So I wanted to talk then about what is sabermetrics. To my way of thinking, sabermetrics is, if you think of baseball research as visualize it as a planet, there is a core, a hard core of statistics, a hard core of numbers, which are like bricks that sit at the very core. And there is a fringe of questions, a surface of questions. And between that hard core of facts and that surface of questions, there are vast oceans, vast areas of molten ignorance. Our job, what sabermetrics is finding a way to tie those questions to that core, finding a way to connect a power cord or connect a hose or connect a string between one of those questions and that pile of data that is at the core of the research planet. That's my image of what we do. I would say that outside of this room, 99.9% of the world has no understanding of what we do. They think that it begins with the numbers. They think that what it is building up that pile of numbers in the middle. Well, adding to the pile of numbers is essential to good research, but it isn't research in and of itself. Research is connecting that pile of data to questions that you're curious about. As I said, when I started, this was very easy because we just really didn't know anything. And an example of this is there was a SABR publication in the 1970s in which a man whose name I think was Kingsley tried to explain why there were so many home runs hit in Atlanta. And again, here, for all I know, he could still be alive and be out in the audience. I don't know. God, I hope not. If you are alive and in the audience, please belch loudly so I can. Oh, I heard a belch. Anyway, he considered all of the studies, all of the differences between Atlanta and St. Louis. St. Louis and Atlanta had almost exactly the same dimensions, and and yet there were many, many more home runs hit in Atlanta than there were in St. Louis. So he tried to explain why this was. He was an engineer of some kind. And he came to the conclusion that it was the psychological influence of people expecting to hit home runs in Atlanta. Well, that's not true. I mean, but at the time, none of us really understood what it was. And it's such a simple thing. About 1978 or 1979, a man named Dick O'Brien, who was older then, I'm sure must have moved on, but in any case, very fond of Dick O'Brien. He's a wonderful man. But Dick O'Brien did a study in which he looked at the teams in the Texas League. And it happened by a fortunate coincidence that the 8 teams in the Texas League had all had almost exactly the same field dimensions, but had widely different, wide variations in altitude of the park. And he found that there was a very strong and very direct correlation between the altitude of the park and the number of home runs that were hit there. Well, once you point it out, it's obvious, right? It's unbelievable that we didn't understand that, but the fact is that we didn't. We had so much ignorance to work with that making an impact on the world was kind of easy. The fact is, though, that there will never be any shortage of ignorance. I mean, the world is not going to run out of ignorance. Take my word for it. In the 1970s, primarily, Pete Palmer did research arguing against the use of the bunt. And I'm sure you all know this story. But Pete did studies that showed that generally when you bunt, you lose runs rather than gaining them, and your chance of scoring 1 run in the inning goes down rather than up. And teams were behaving in ignorance by using the bunt as much as they did. When he did that, the rest of us tried to disprove it. And I tried every way I could to disprove it. And when we all tried to disprove that and failed, it became something that was accepted as true. And teams bunt a lot less now than they used to, essentially because Pete demonstrated that it was unwise. But do you think everything the managers do now makes any sense? Let us take, for example, the business of bringing in a left-handed reliever to face a left-handed batter constantly. Most teams do that around 200 times a season. If you work through the numbers, it is extremely apparent to me that this is a massive waste of resources. First of all, the number of runs that you can save by doing that is very small. I don't see how it could be as large as 5 runs per team per year. I think you have to stretch everything to the maximum to get it to the range of 5 runs a year. The opportunity cost of doing that is huge. The opportunity cost is that by doing that, you have to expand your bullpen, which means you have to shrink your bench, which means that you don't have pinch hitters, you don't have defensive replacements, you don't have pinch runners. It's obvious to me that it doesn't work. Nonetheless, it will go on until one of 2 things happens. One of you guys will prove that I'm wrong about that, or a bunch of you will try to prove that I'm wrong and fail, and eventually, 30 years down the road, they'll kind of half stop doing it. And it's very possible I'm wrong. I'm not all that good at calculating. The reason that I played the role that I did in helping Sabermetrics emerge is that I had very poor options. I mean, Pete Palmer and Dick Kramer had serious job skills, and they were making a very good living doing other things. I didn't really have any other skills. This is about all I could do. So I did it fanatically and wrote about it, and it turned out that there were a lot more people who were interested in it once you could get past the barrier where there was a world of people talking about that, there were people interested in it. Excuse me just a second. Well, I'd pick that up, but I've already done my Mark Rubio impression. I like Mark Rubio. I'm not picking on him. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about here is the structure of a baseball front office. And the reason I want to talk about this is two reasons. For one, when I entered baseball about 10 years ago, working for a team, I had no understanding of how this all fit together. No one had ever explained it to me. And second, I find from the questions I'm asked from others that a lot of people apparently don't understand it either. For example, I remember talking to somebody in my family, and they asked, it was December, and I'd just come back from Fenway, and they said, "Are there people that are working there down in the middle of winter?" Well, yeah. How many people? Oh, probably 150, 200 people at Fenway Park every day, working, getting ready for it. It's like, what on earth are they doing? People have no concept of what a front office does. So I thought I'd explain the structure. A modern baseball front office has two almost entirely separate divisions. There is the business side and the baseball operations side. The baseball operations side is responsible for putting the team together and other things that I'll talk about more. The business side is responsible, for example, selling tickets, arranging the broadcast, hiring the lawyers, arranging sponsorships. I actually don't have any idea what all they do because I don't work over on that side, but I do know there are a lot more of them than there are of us and that they're all busy. We don't have any control over them at all. They, on the other hand, have some control over us. And it absolutely has to be that way because teams have to make money. If you don't make money, you go out of existence, and that's not a good option. So the business side has to have some control over what you're doing, but you have no control whatsoever over what they're doing. And basically no input into what they're doing. For example, I'll give you a small but irrelevant but useful example. I've had this idea for about 10 years that when you had a base runner leading off from first base, like Carl Crawford or Jacoby, and it's a base stealing situation, that you should play just a few bars of the great Leonard Skinner song, "Give Me 3 Steps." Give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, give me 3 steps toward the door. I just think it's a little joke. But I have no idea how to actually make this happen. I mean, I know one of those people on the other side, upstairs in Fenway, arranges that kind of thing, but I don't know who it is. So you're the first people I've told about this idea. I've been sitting on it for 10 years. So I'm counting on you. And Leonard Skinner is counting on you. All right, there are many divisions to the business operations side of it, and then there's baseball operation. There's basically 3 divisions. There's scouting, there's field operations, and there's the front office team or the office management group. The scouting is also divided into 3 groups. There's amateur scouting, professional scouting, and there's international scouting. We will always need scouts. And let me try to explain a little bit why that is. If college baseball was let's suppose that the caliber of a major league competition is represented by the number 1,000, right? If college baseball was at 800, that is, if it was only 20 or 25% below the major league level, then you could take college numbers and adjust them and project them, and you could tell who would be a major league player, a good major league player based on the numbers. But college baseball is at somewhere around 40 or 45. So in order to project the numbers, you have to project them across a very, very, very wide gap. And when you project numbers across a very wide gap, if you all work with numbers, you know what happens. Curves bend, things go off on tangents, and you don't wind up with the projections are not accurate. Also, almost everybody that we sign has to become better in order to play. I mean, unless you're Ryan Braun, you have to get better before you can reach the level of a major league player. The scout then has to make judgments about a player's ability to get better. And there's no way in the world you're ever going to be able to do that with numbers, in my opinion. I shouldn't say that because you can do lots of things with numbers I haven't thought of, but I don't see how you're ever going to do that. So scouts are essential for that reason. Another thing, you remember yesterday, Javi Lopez was talking about what a great guy Johnny Gomes was in the clubhouse. Well, when we were talking about, and I shouldn't talk about things that happened in the Red Sox, but I don't think I'll get fired for this one. We were talking about signing Johnny Gomes, and I said I had a kind of negative impression of him as a person based on something that happened years ago. I think when he was with Tampa Bay, we got into a fight on the field with Tampa Bay, and I got a negative impression of Johnny Gomes, and I said something about that. And there were like 3 scouts in the room who knew Johnny Gomes, and we were looking at it. You know, he's very, very strong, and I looked at him and said, "Wow, he looks like he's been lifting weights since he was 15, rather than any kind of a steroid money or anything." And one of the scouts said, "Yeah, his father's the wrestling coach at Petaluma. Petaluma, California, it turns out, is a wrestling powerhouse in California. They've had a wrestling champions many times, and Johnny Gomes' father is the wrestling coach, and he has in fact been lifting weights since he was 15 years old. But any player that you discuss, there will be several scouts who know him, who knew him when he was 15, who knew him when he was 17, when he was 20. Somebody in the room had been a manager of him when he was in A-ball. It's always that way. You can't bring up a player so obscure that some of the scouts won't know him and know who he is. And that kind of information it's totally impractical to try to replace it with organized statistical information. The scouting will always be vital. All right. Field operations can also be divided into about 3 divisions. There's minor league operations, there's major league operations, and then there's you could call it field staff. You have about 8 minor league teams. You have a lot of practice fields. You have a lot of buses. You have minor league broadcast. You have to sell minor league tickets. All of that stuff has to be done in the field, and it has to be supervised from headquarters. So, I mean, that's a lot of people involved in doing that, and it requires constant attention. Much, much more of our time is focused on the minor league operations than the major league operations. We're spending, and I don't really know what it is, but I guess somewhere around $200,000 a day on minor league operations. It's a lot of money, right? And the major league money tends to gush out the door in great whooshes, you know. The major league money tends to go out in big buckets, but the minor league money tends to go out a little bit at a time. So a lot more time and attention is put into watching it, you know, making sure that you're paying everybody who needs to be paid and not paying them twice and that sort of thing. All right, that's scouting. I keep dividing things into 3s, and I'm sure I've confused you with that. But anyway, there's scouting, field operations, and office management. Well, the office management group can be divided into about 4 groups. There's the department heads, there's the financial management, there's the information systems, and there's the decision-making process. The the department, every one of those subgroups that I mentioned has department heads. Somebody is the head of amateur scouting, somebody is the head of professional scouting, somebody is the head of international scouting. Somebody is head of the minor league system and the assistant head of the minor league system. All of those people are in the third leg of the front office. We also, Tom Tippett is head of our information process system. We spend a lot of time and effort gathering information, buying information, purchasing information, using information. There are two things that we talk to the other. You remember I started by talking about the business side of it and the baseball operations side. For the most part, we don't talk. There are two things that we talk about. That's spending money and public relations. The public relations people come down every day talking about, we had a player who had a rather serious speeding ticket recently, and believe me, there were, Tom, how many meetings were there about that speeding ticket, you suppose? There were several before a statement was released, and there's something going on every day, so that you have to talk to public relations people every day. And the financial management, well, a baseball team has not merely a budget, but many, many, many different budgets. Have cash budgets and accrual budgets, so everybody who works in the front office, except me, is always worrying about one of the budgets or another. And there are endless meetings about the budget. So that's kind of what we're doing when we meet when there are 150 people working at Fenway Park in the middle of the winter. That's kind of what they're doing. I mention that because I figured there are a lot of people here who want to work in baseball someday. And when I started working in the game, I just had no idea how this all fit together. And still a lot of it I still don't get. Going back to what I was starting, there were two people who worked in baseball in the 1980s who had the word Sabermetrics on their business cards. They were both good friends of mine. Alluding to something that happened recently in the Red Sox organization, were you ever, but not saying what it was, were you ever in a meeting with your boss and your boss showed up a few minutes late? When you're in a meeting with your boss and your boss shows up late, that's normal, right? If you're in a meeting with your boss and your boss shows up late and you find yourself getting irritated about it, you're running too hot and you need to back off and turn down your burners. My two friends who worked in baseball in the 1980s, I think both much appreciated the opportunity to do that. But both had difficult careers that they didn't get the opportunity to be GMs. They were never interviewed to be GMs. And they left the game short of their goals and with some bitterness. Part of the reason is that they ran too hot to work successfully in an organization. And I don't fault them for it. You have to remember what it was like in the 1980s. We were a tiny, isolated minority. I think they were not treated with a lot of respect by their organizations. Organizations are always in some sort of conflict about what to do, and you lose a lot of those battles. I lose a lot of those battles. The Red Sox this year there were two major battles that went on this winter that I was completely on the losing side of, and that's fine. I don't expect the Red Sox to do everything I think they should do. But I'm treated with respect. I think my friends who worked in baseball in the 1980s probably weren't treated with much respect, and because of that they were emotional, and because they were emotional they ran too hot, and it interfered with their careers. If you do get the chance to work in baseball, and I hope many of you do, and I know many of you will, remember not to run too hot. There are a lot of people involved in these decisions, and you just have to accept that, this is, that they're only going to listen to you a certain percentage of the time. That's just the way it is. I was just getting to the interesting stuff, and I'm getting a message already. It's time to take questions. Well, all right. I'll take questions. Let me before I start to take questions. In 2 minutes, I'm going to start dragging out questions. But yesterday, as Brian Kenny was talking, I was taking notes, and he discussed a number of things that I thought would be relevant to talk about. For one thing, he talked about the shredder. If you watch his show, you know what the shredder is. Well, the Red Sox last year also had a shredder. The shredder and Nick Punto are not the same person, but they do inhabit the same body. After the Red Sox win a game and everybody's in sort of a jubilant mood, you learn to stay away from that fellow who looks like Nick Punto, because he will come up and rip your shirt to shreds. It's not him, it's the shredder. But the shredder and Nick Punto are never seen together. So that sort of stuff works really well when you're upbeat and you're winning a lot of games. When you're on target to lose 93 games, it doesn't work so well. So that kind of explains why. Brian Kenny raised the question of why a team hasn't gone bullpen. Talking about pitchers as sprinters as opposed to marathon runners. You know, you can run faster if you're running 200 yards than you can if you're running 2 miles, right? Every one of you can. And for the same exact reasons, a pitcher is more effective when he's pitching 1 inning than when he's trying to throw 150 pitches. Brian was asking the question, why hasn't the team really bought into that and replaced the starting rotation with a series of pitchers who just go 2 or 3 innings each, throw as hard as they can for as long as they can, and come back on short rest? Well, the reason it hasn't happened is this. If you take a bad team and you do that, you're not going to be a good team. If you take a team that should lose 100 games and you switch to that strategy, it will help you, I think. It would help you, but you're still going to lose 95 games. So because you're going to lose 95 games, it's still going to be perceived as a losing strategy. If you have a team that should lose 90 games, you might be able to cut it to 85, but it's still going to be perceived as a losing strategy. If there was a liver shot type of strategy, then that could turn a last place team into a first place team, then it can be adopted immediately. But you have a strategy of this nature that only makes an incremental difference, it can only win incremental, it can only be adopted incrementally. If you look at it, it is being adopted incrementally. We are moving more and more to more innings being pitched by the bullpen. We have been going that way for a long time. The World Baseball Classic, they've got pitch limits on pitchers, so a lot of things are happening to move us in that direction, but it's by accretion. It's not like a liver shot. And this gets back to the question of, some of you are wondering, well, rather than telling us that you think this stuff about bringing in the left-handed reliever to face a left-handed pitcher is a waste of time and is an unwise strategy, why don't you go tell John Farrell? Well, that's not the way the world works. I like John Farrell. He's very easy to talk to. There's no issue of that nature. But it's just not the way the world works that somebody in our field goes directly to a manager, persuades him to do that, and strategy changes in that way. It changes instead in this way. Within this community, eventually a consensus will develop that it is wise or it isn't, and then that consensus will move, and eventually somebody will start to see it that way. Okay, I'm hoping to take questions. I'm hoping somebody has some questions. Yes, sir.
I hope this is a simple question, but if you wouldn't mind me expanding your remarks, thank you for being here. Do you believe, as I do, and I believe many others in this room agree as well, that you deserve to be in the Pioneers wing of the Hall of Fame, and why?
No, because I think everybody in there is dead, and that didn't seem like a good option. That's it. Yes, sir.
Outrage at the time, and of course there are people like Earl Weaver, if not expressly endorsing what you said by actions. Managers had realized that Earl was the 3-run homers and pitching, but how did you come about that, and your thinking of the reaction when you came out with I don't think you said don't bunt, but you know, an automatic bunt isn't going to, you talked about wasting the out, so to speak.
Well, first of all, Earl Weaver was ahead of any of us, I think. If you go back to when Earl Weaver started managing the Orioles, which about 1968, I think mid-season 68, is that right? His first 2 or 3 years, he actually bunted an average amount. And then he started to bunt a little less and a little less. And by the end of his career, he'd bunt 5-10 times a year. It was Pete Palmer, more than anyone else, who originated that theory. Pete measured, or tried to measure, and again, we had the advantage of massive ignorance, and nobody had done this obvious stuff before, but he measured the run expectation from each of the 24 inning states, and then compared the run expectation of man on second, 1 out, with the run expectation of man on first, nobody out, and concluded it went way down, and so he began to argue that bunt doesn't make sense. You know, I tried to say, well, yes, but what about this, but what about this? But all the what about this failed. I mean, you can't ultimately come up with any good reason why Pete's insight about the relative value of those. Here's something I was trying to get to in the main part of my speech, but I didn't. People are very, very bad at judging intuitively relative values. To make a judgment about the relative value of this advantage versus that advantage it's just not something that we do well unless we use actual math. Because that is true, when somebody discovers an advantage, the first thing they will do with it is overrun their headlights, use it 5 times as much as they should use it, and waste resources. That's what happened with the bunt, and that's what's happened with the left-handed relievers thing. It's done so much because people are very bad at calculating the cost and the benefits. And that's basically what Pete showed. Well, if there are no more questions, I appreciate your time. And yes, sir.
Nobody has a question. Bill, how much do you think working for a baseball organization has impeded your writing, and what are your thoughts on where you should spend your energy?
It's cost me a lot of writing time. I try to budget a third of my time working for the Red Sox, but the reality is it's a lot more than that, and I don't, I'm old and running out of energy, and I just don't have the energy to do the Red Sox work and do the writing the way that I hope that I might. So, it makes a difference. I appreciate your generous remarks yesterday, and since you made them, I took a number of things that wrote down a number of things I was going to argue with you about. Perhaps I'll use this opportunity to bring up a couple of Brian talked about the importance of making employees happy. What he said was literally true, and I had the same thought myself, that when you if you did more to make sure your employees are comfortable, you'll get better results. But there is a limitation to it that's very important. I remember reading an academic study which compared the happiness of various people after certain events. Most of you know what I used to refer to as the law of competitive balance. The law of competitive balance is everything tends to be driven toward the center in baseball. Players who hit 250 one year and 300 the next year don't tend to go up to 350 the next year. They tend to go down to 275. Everything's driven back toward the center. That's the law of competitive balance. Well, the law of competitive balance also controls happiness. There are academic studies about this, as I'm sure most of you know, but as one academic who had studied it put it in an NPR interview or something, if you compare one group of people who won the lottery and another group of people who suffered some terrible accident, such as losing a hand or losing an eye or the death of a relative, and you look at how happy they are a year later, there's no difference. And you know, you're happy if you have the ability to manage your own emotions and reach a certain level of happiness. The same happens in a baseball team. If you try to make players happy all the time, what you wind up with is spoiled players who don't feel like they should have to do anything for themselves, and they're not any happier than they would be. You just move the standards. So what you're saying is literally true. If you get ahead of that curve, you have an advantage. But then everybody else has to keep up with the curve, and in the end it doesn't. You know, it becomes, because of the law of competitive balance, it becomes a sort of a chasing an impossible standard. We also talked about knuckleballers yesterday. Oh, by the way, the Red Sox have a knuckleballer, a AA, who's quite good. His name is Stephen Wright. He's quite good. He's not very far from being a major league starting pitcher. Before he started throwing a knuckleball, he wasn't a long way from being a major league starting pitcher either. But then the knuckleball is pretty good, and we're optimistic he's going to be around. But Theo, when he was in Boston, was always trying to develop knuckleballers. He always had some plan about how he's going to develop knuckleballers, and it never worked. And it never works because there are a long, long series of small barriers to it that are invisible from the outside. There's nobody to coach them. It's difficult to get people to coach them. There's nobody who can catch them. When a knuckleballer wants to throw a side station in the minor leagues, there's nobody there to catch him. Nobody wants to catch him. And nobody can catch him. They're difficult to use minor league knuckleballers in a minor league game because you can't just bring them in, because 9 times in 10 the catcher can't catch the damn thing at all. So you can't let them pitch with anybody on base. It's just very, very hard to develop knuckleballers for reasons that are not really apparent until you try it. So I wanted to say that as well. I appreciate the question, and I hope you don't mind the cheap shots. We're on a paddle together tomorrow. You'll have plenty of chances to get even. Yes, sir.
You mentioned at the top about good questions. Can you give us some recent examples of good questions that you want to see answered that have come to you in recent memory?
No, I think there are as many of them as there have ever been, but I think I may be losing my ability to find them. I guess the answer would be no. I'm sure I'll come up with one as soon as I'm no longer up here. Yes, sir.
Vince told me I was the last question, so just to let you know. So there's a perception that the teams have these uber metrics that are extremely accurate, very good, and that public websites, not naming any in particular, may have other metrics that are lagging behind in some way. I guess I was wondering if you could speak to where you see the public's use of metrics and the publicly available metrics relative to where the teams are, and how useful do you see those metrics that actually are available to the public as being relative to what a team might have available to them with their armies of interns?
Well, it's very much like whenever there's any sort of crisis and the White House doesn't react to it in the right way, somebody will say, well, why wasn't the White House on top of this? The information gathering capacities of the White House are nothing compared to the information gathering capacities of the press, right? I mean, you've got tens of thousands of reporters in this country. They have a heck of a lot more ability to gather information than the White House does. So the White House is always going to be behind the press, behind the public, and it's the same thing. I mean, the accumulated brain power of the people in this room is a great deal more than the accumulated brain power of the analytical people with the Red Sox. So you're always going to be ahead of us, and we'll always be playing catch up and trying to keep up with what you're doing. We're never going to get ahead of you, my opinion. I don't know why, but this also reminded me of another point I wanted to make. We were talking about managing the clubhouse a little yesterday as opposed to managing the team on the field. During the season, we spend many more hours trying to manage the clubhouse than we do trying to manage the team. Managing the clubhouse is a heck of a lot harder than managing the team. And you just worry about it. It's not like you worry about it once in a while. You worry about it every day. I mean, what's this, if you bring in this player, what's his contribution to the team? And is he somebody you can count on? Is it going to be an incident? We spend a lot more time worrying about that. And the reason for it, look at last year's team. I mean, we didn't do a good job of managing that stuff, and it was a disaster. I mean, last year's team had plenty of ability in terms of the ability to win. We had Beckett and Lester and Ellsbury and Pedroia and Middlebrooks and Ortiz. We had plenty of ability to win, but the clubhouse was just a mess, and we didn't come together. We spent a lot more time worrying about that than we do worrying about the team, and it's always going to be that way. Right. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate your time.